Hello. So, we're going to be looking at the lessons of circumcision. From circumcision, the hidden trauma, how an American cultural practice affects infants and ultimately us all. If we are to have real peace, we must begin with the children. Gandhi. For many readers, this book is an introduction to much new information. This chapter serves to both summarize and explore the meaning of some of the ideas previously presented. Further investigation of these issues could contribute to our understanding of the powerful impact of circumcision as well as other perinatal experiences. It could teach us much about ourselves and possibly provide answers to individual and societal problems. There is no single way to address all questions. Multiple approaches are needed. At the same time, we know a lot more about circumcision and associated matters than is generally thought. What researchers have learned about infants, for example, is often not reflected in how we treat them. This is a tragedy for the infants and for all of us. Infants are real people. The typical attitude toward infants was perhaps illustrated by an incident a father related to me concerning his 2.5-year-old son. He asked his son to put the milk in the refrigerator. After his son did this, the father, for the first time, thought, "He's a real person. My son is a real person." Evidently, it was both his son's understanding of language and his ability to perform a customary physical act that led the father to this realization. But what about the first 2.5 years of his son's life? Apparently, he had not previously been considered to be a real person. People might say he was just a baby. It is convenient not to consider the infant a person who has feelings. Then parents have license to do what they want with the infant. Are we prejudiced when it comes to infants? Perceived differences are used to justify prejudice. We assume that when things look different, they are different. In comparing a newborn infant to an adult, we find many apparent differences: age, size, skin color, vocal and body language, intelligence, responsiveness, eating habits, body proportions, physical coordination and strength, interests, and personality, to name a few. Consequently, we tend to view infants as being very different from ourselves, and our attitudes and behavior can demonstrate our prejudice. This pre existing prejudice toward infants continues to play a major role in the practice of circumcision. Despite the differences, infants are real people. When we deny an infant's humanity, we deny our own humanity. Our prejudiced view of infants says more about us than it does about them. The perceived differences are used to justify adult ethnocentrism, a view that adults are superior to non adults. Our prejudice serves to conceal our own feelings of inferiority and low self esteem. Thus, we are part of a self perpetuating cycle. We experience prejudice as infants when we are subjected to it by adults. When we become adults, we view infants and other apparently dissimilar groups with prejudice. We pass on to others what we ourselves experienced. We also falsely attribute our own feelings or traits to infants, an act called projection. For example, the belief that infants do not remember is a projection of our failure to remember our own infancy. We do remember, but the memories are generally unconscious. If we think infants do not feel, it is a projection of our own lack of feeling. When we are not open to infant signals, we assume that infants do not communicate. Therefore, before evaluating the abilities of infants, we might conduct some self examination. Our understanding of the human infant has undergone a revolutionary change in the last 20 years because of innovative research. We are learning how to design experiments that give infants an opportunity to teach us who they are. As a result, we are discovering that infants are much more capable than we thought possible. Even though infants are relatively helpless without verbal language and totally dependent on adults for their well being, they are much like us and they feel deeply. The latest research on infant development confirms that human infants are very aware, sensitive, perceptive, and responsive to their environment. All senses are working, and infants seek sensory stimulation. Purposeful movement has been observed within minutes of birth. Facial expressions are similar to those of adults. Smiling has been observed at birth. Cries are meaningful and can express specific feelings and needs. The behavior of infants is rational and they are enthusiastic learners. Infants have specific preferences and they can even evaluate their experience. Their memory and learning abilities have been demonstrated from various behavioral experiments and physiological responses. Their ability to learn a given behavior and respond to obtain a reward suggests mental activity and anticipation. The more we discover about infants, the more we discover about ourselves. There is great potential that as we learn and implement what we learn, we can give the next generation a much better start in life. The research further suggests that rather than just consulting the experts on infant care, we should be paying more attention to the infant. Pediatrician T. Berry Brazelton agrees. The question parents ask me the most frequently is, how do I know I'm doing the right thing? I tell them, watch the baby, he'll tell you. We can trust infant responses as authentic and meaning. Based on numerous studies, the infant's response to pain is similar to or greater than that of the adult. In particular, an infant's behavioral response to circumcision is a powerful personal communication of overwhelming pain. Adult intentions and beliefs regarding circumcision and infants do not diminish infant circumcision pain. Adult intentions and beliefs regarding circumcision and infants do not diminish infant circumcision pain. The infant's communication were being received, it would make clear that circumcision is not something we should be doing. Changes in behavioral responses following circumcision indicate that the experience is remembered. Recognizing the infant as a person has important implications, not the least of which is recognizing infant autonomy. Infants have preferences, wants, and needs. Adults can choose to dismiss many of these because of the overwhelming physical power and control they have over the infant. Such adult behavior teaches the infant that one must have physical power to get what one wants or needs. But if adults instead recognize the infant as a person, there is a relationship to consider. Ignoring the infant's needs solely because one has greater physical power and control weakens the relationship because the infant's feelings do matter. All this applies to circumcision, which is done by force without regard for the infant's feelings. He gets the strong message that the world uses force to hurt him and that physical power matters more than feeling and relationship. The idea of infant autonomy conflicts with most parents' beliefs, but is it The parents' inherent responsibility to care for the infant, which includes satisfying the infant's needs and protecting the infant from pain. Generally, most parents were not giving this kind of care when they were children. Parents face the challenge of examining what they believe about child rearing and how they choose to treat their children instead of simply enforcing their will with their power. If we want our children to treat others with respect and consideration, whatever their physical or social standing, then we need to treat our children that way starting from birth. Much of what is done in hospitals to newborn infants violates maternal instincts. Many mothers have called our office and related their stories of abandoning their impulse to stop what was being done to their baby. When we fail to trust and act on our impulses, we forfeit our personal power and become victims of our own fear. Parents need to be aware of the impact of their choices and make them prudently. In some cases, protecting the best interests of their child may require that the parents make an extra effort to verify questionable information, and the result may be a decision that goes against standard practice. Circumcision trauma and the effects on adults. This book has documented the work of 8 clinicians who have independently and directly observed the long term effects of circumcision and other perinatal trauma through clients who have remembered or relived such events. Those clinicians are author Genove, Stanislav Grof, Leslie Faher, Thomas Vernet, Richard Schwartzman, David Chamberlain, Rima Leibov, and Charles Konaya. There are probably hundreds of other practitioners who use comparable methods and have had similar experience. Psychologist David Chamberlain reports that thousands of people around the world have remembered their birth. Some reports of perinatal memories have been corroborated, yet many medical and psychological professionals are affected by a cultural bias and restricted by a theoretical framework that does not accommodate such experience. More research is needed, but it is also time for more professionals to take note of the work that has already been done and to reevaluate outdated theories and assumptions. What we know of the infant's neurological development, trauma theory, clinical experience, and research results all support the conclusion that circumcision is a trauma. Like other traumas, the experience of circumcision is repressed, but may be remembered or relived under special circumstances. Some men report long term psychological effects of circumcision. These effects are typically connected with childhood scenes when the lack of a foreskin was recognized in comparison with intact children. Circumcised men are missing both a part of their bodies and a part of their experience. While the conscious mind may not be aware of this, the body knows and remembers by storing tension connected with repressed emotions. The fact that most circumcised men are not aware of associated effects does not necessarily mean that the effects are not present or are insignificant. The feelings of dissatisfaction expressed by some circumcised men could remain repressed among many more circumcised men. Some harmful effects may not be connected to circumcision because they appear many years after the precipitating event. In addition, other men may be reluctant to disclose their dissatisfaction because of a sense that these feelings will not be believed or taken seriously. Long term psychological effects associated with circumcision can be difficult to establish because the consequences of early trauma are only very rarely and under special circumstances recognizable to the person who experienced the trauma. However, lack of awareness does not necessarily mean that there has been no impact on thinking, feeling, attitude, behavior, and functioning, which are often closely connected. In this way, an early trauma can alter a whole life, whether or not the trauma is consciously remembered. As discussed previously, it is now well established, for example, that adults who were abused as children suffer adverse behavioral responses connected with their early trauma. In addition, psychopathology is not always detectable by trained clinicians. The effects of circumcision trauma can be chronic and so deeply embedded that it is very difficult to distinguish them from personality traits or effects resulting from other causes. As with other traumas, the psychopathological outcome may vary, but the reported and behavioral symptoms of circumcision trauma appear to be consistent with the symptom pattern of post traumatic stress disorder. Adult symptoms could be considered delayed psychological effects of circumcision. The most common chronic symptom is probably emotional restriction and inability to express feelings of varied intensity. Furthermore, because circumcision is common, its effects are common and are interpreted as normal. This view is analogous to the outdated belief that the limited behavioral responses of newborn infants were normal when, in fact, their capabilities were diminished by the effects of drugs and routine medical interventions. Other likely symptoms associated with circumcision are avoidance of circumcision related stimuli, usually the topic itself, problems with infancy, and reduced self esteem. These are common symptoms in trauma victims who appear to have normal functioning. In addition, the lack of control and betrayal of trust that circumcised men experienced as infants may, at least in some cases, be connected with a degree of distrust and a desire for control. If the effect of circumcision is similar to that of other physical traumas, then the individual's character can be changed by the experience. Obviously, the adverse sexual impact of circumcision can only expand and compound the psychological effects. The combined sexual and psychological effects on men probably have an indirect effect on women and others in relationships. As a society, we do not acknowledge the severe pain that circumcision causes infants, although it is amply documented. The discovery that some men feel harmed by circumcision, whatever the prevalence of this feeling, is a warning that we should heed. It seems that as we come to realize the long term effects of circumcision on adults, we will reconsider our attitudes and actions regarding the practice. This is unlike, for example, our attitude toward the rape of adolescents. We do not wait to ask how rape will affect their adulthood or old age. We recognize the gravity of the act itself. The same standard should apply to assessing such acts involving infants. Circumcision and disrupted bonding. Secure attachment is necessary for proper development. The disruption of attachment bonds may lead to stress, various forms of psychopathology, as well as neurochemical, physiological, and behavioral changes. Determining the long term disruptive effect of circumcision on bonding is complicated by the fact that disrupted bonding is so common in American infant care and child rearing. For example, although it is widely accepted that optimum care for an infant requires almost constant contact with the mother, this level of caretaking is not typical in America. Not only are the mother and infant often separated in the hospital after birth, but half of all infants have mothers who work outside the home. By contrast, in a hunter gatherer society, the infant is in contact with the mother 70 to 80% of the time during the first year, and the rest of the time with someone else. Extensive non maternal care of infants in the first year is associated with insecure infant mother attachment. Conclusions that secure attachment requires both that the mother have close contact with the child and that she be responsive to infant communication may seem obvious to some, but these conclusions challenge the beliefs and lifestyle of others. Cultural change will be required in order to support optimum infant care. Public education on the importance of secure attachment is needed because if the bonding does not happen, the infant will suffer, whether that suffering is actively expressed or not. Research has demonstrated that the quality of attachment is influenced by both the infant and the mother, and that the social dynamics of the mother child relationship are similar to those of other two-person relationships. How one person feels and responds affects how the other person feels and responds. The adverse and direct effects that circumcision can have on mother infant interaction, including the infant's failure to breastfeed, have been confirmed by studies. In some cases, improper parental response may be connected with changes in infant behavior following circumcision, and these changes can contribute to weak attachment. Clinical experience, child development theory, and infant behavior suggest that circumcision can impair bonding by having a negative effect on the infant's ability to trust. In addition, a mother's lack of secure attachment with her new child may contribute to maternal depression. Whatever the reason for poor attachment, adverse consequences are likely to follow. When attachment is weak, a parent is more inclined to neglect or harm the infant. Because most parents do not observe their son's circumcision in the hospital and are not aware of what he has experienced, the prolonged crying, irritability, or withdrawal that may result are not usually viewed as being associated with the practice. However, some mothers do make the connection. If newborn infants remain with their mother after birth, attachment is more secure and the mother may be more sensitive to changes in her infant after circumcision. Furthermore, a number of mothers have observed their son's circumcision. Some of them have recurrent and distressing thoughts and recollections of the event. In particular, they do not forget the screams of their son. Their statements suggest that they may have intrusive post traumatic stress disorder symptoms. The negative impact of circumcision on attachment is perhaps as evident from these mothers' distressed responses of regret and guilt as it is from the infant's behavioral changes. As more mothers speak out about their experience with circumcision, the disrupting effect of circumcision on mother child bonding will become more apparent. Because of the far reaching developmental implications, the potential effect of circumcision on the quality of the mother child relationship and subsequent relationships may be one of the most important adverse impacts of the practice. American motivation to circumcise. Parents who agree to the circumcision procedure for their newborn son are typically not aware of important information and, as a result, cannot give true informed consent. Those men who most strongly insist on circumcision for their sons are least aware of the effect their own circumcision has had on them physically, sexually, and emotionally. American parents do not know what they don't know about circumcision. Furthermore, it is not just information that is lacking, but also experience. Parents consenting to a circumcision generally do not see the procedure being done. Those that do see it are often horrified. Considering the seriousness of the circumcision decision, the lack of awareness is alarming. It raises the question, why did not you know? Virtually everyone has heard about circumcision, but few bother to examine what it really is. The lack of curiosity is no accident. Avoidance of the issue by circumcised men is a likely PTSD symptom that can be transmitted to others. It signals an iceberg of underlying emotional factors that are generally connected with fears, anxieties, pain, sexuality, and threats to self esteem. Together, they contribute to a compulsion to repeat the trauma. Therefore, circumcision is not typically done just for assumed health reasons. Instead, many interdependent psychological factors account for the continued American practice of circumcision. Existential psychologist Rollo May wrote, "It is dangerous to know, but it is more dangerous to not know. The danger in knowing about circumcision is that one is then vulnerable to feeling the associated emotional pain of what has been done. The greater danger is that without this knowledge, we will continue to circumcise and cause more pain. Knowledge gives us the ability to make better choices. Many parents confuse their intention concerning circumcision with the effects of circumcision. They believe that as long as no harm is intended, no harm can occur. This does not necessarily follow. Parents do not know what they are choosing, and physicians do not feel what they are doing. The separation of the decision maker from the decision implementer helps to perpetuate the pain. In studies involving physicians and parents, men are more likely than women to choose circumcision for the newborn. Based on the results of a preliminary survey, the following factors make it more likely that a man will choose circumcision for a son. He is circumcised himself. He is glad he is circumcised. He believes he is well informed about circumcision when he, in fact, is not. He has never seen a circumcision. He does not know the purpose of the foreskin, and he minimizes the size of the foreskin. A so called neutral or balanced presentation of circumcision to parents is preferred by physicians and childbirth educators, but it does not provide accurate and complete information to those who need to make the decision. It appears that few involved in the circumcision decision are aware that circumcision can have a long term effect on sexual experience and functioning. In addition, the use and exclusion of certain words in the educational literature and in public discourse help to maintain general support for circumcision. Based on this study, the mention of possible long term psychological effects should now be included in information provided to parents. Communication between the physician and parents is often insufficient for informed consent, largely because of emotional discomfort with the subject. The discussion may instead include incorrect tacit assumptions by doctor and patient, about what the other really wants or means. These assumptions tend to lean toward the decision to circumcise. The parents' lack of expertise then leads them to defer to the doctor's supposed knowledge, thus contributing to communication deficiencies and a decision to circumcise. Although doctors do not require that parents choose circumcision and parents believe they are fully making their choice, doctors do exercise control over the parents' decision by controlling information. Some doctors may use emotional arguments to persuade parents. Both physicians and parents are subject to emotional repression and denial about circumcision. These defense mechanisms unconsciously distort their ideas. These defense mechanisms unconsciously distort their ideas and perceptions about the practice. The doctor's motivation may be connected to the fact that he is circumcised and has performed many circumcisions. Financial incentive is a motivating factor for some doctors to circumcise. For most doctors, however, conscious and unconscious emotional factors seem to be primary. The father's preference for circumcision may be connected with his own circumcision or the fact that his other sons are circumcised. One way to justify inflicting pain and suffering on others is to believe that otherwise more pain and suffering will follow. Using this strategy to defend circumcision requires minimizing or denying the harm caused by circumcision and producing overstated medical claims about protection from future harm. In fact, the treatment is worse than the potential disease, justifying the practice of circumcision with warnings of worse outcomes, unlikely or rare conditions such as infection, cancer, etc. If it is not done, is a certain indication of fallacious reasoning. The medical arguments used to support circumcision are based on untenable logic, flawed science, and incomplete information. The social myths are equally irrational and incongruous. How can foreskin be insignificant and yet noticed by others in the locker room? In other circumstances, adults are generally sensitive to the pain and suffering of children because of children's vulnerability and innocence. For this reason, the welfare of children is sometimes used for political purposes. Virtually no one wants to hurt a child, but by allowing circumcision, we are the ones who are doing the hurting. It is a hard pill to swallow. We do not want to acknowledge our mistake and all that it implies. Thus, avoidance of guilt explains the tenacity with which people defend the practice of circumcision, and the ongoing denial requires the continued ignorance of facts and the acceptance of false beliefs. Science and medicine. According to the medical profession's own analysis of the literature, flawed studies are not the exception. This is explained by the observations that medical investigators generally are not adequately trained to do specific research, and that the pressure to submit to authority constrains their critical thinking. Regarding circumcision, instruction and textbooks are incomplete or inaccurate. Improper medical education has resulted in a significant proportion of doctors who do not know some basic facts connected with circumcision. Like the whole culture, the medical community has avoided and distorted the facts about circumcision. Rather than trust ourselves and our experience, we often rely on science, instrumentation, data, studies. The quest for obtaining more objective data regarding people becomes increasingly impersonal. For example, in research on attachment, mothers are sometimes referred to as attachment objects. Similarly, a physician may prefer to assess a patient's condition by observing instrumentation connected to the patient rather than by observing and communicating with the patient. In this way, researchers often assume that only observations that are measurable are important, and consequently, they ignore what they cannot measure. The infant's cry was not accepted by the medical community as meaningful communication until it could be measured. As a society, we need to question our blind acceptance of science and our belief in objective reality. There is no such thing as objective observation because observations are made by people who have inherent theories and expectations about how things should be. Studies defending circumcision make this abundantly clear by ignoring vital information, such as the functions of the foreskin, that conflicts with their observations, results, and conclusions. Some research is reliable and other research is not. The record shows that we cannot depend on scientific and medical professionals to accurately and completely evaluate a cultural practice such as circumcision. The study of behavior can help us to understand ourselves, but in the medical community, there is greater interest in neurochemical and biological components of behavior rather than in social science approaches. Hormone levels are relatively easy to measure, but behavior is too complex to be reduced to such relatively convenient measurements. In addition, because medical educators take biological science more seriously than social science, physicians starting clinical practice have little training in or appreciation of the importance of social science to their work. They do not view their profession as having socially constructed limitations and distortions, and their behavior as being a product of psychological processes. As Erickson said, the best minds have often been least aware of themselves. Unrecognized psychological factors enter into physicians' beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors regarding circumcision. The practice of circumcision is partly the result of distorted medical priorities regarding emotion. Emotion has an even lower value in the medical world than in the general society. Doctors tend to measure pain rather than feel pain. One medical journal article evaluated circumcision based strictly on a cost utility analysis, as if we have no better way to make the decision. The wholesale dismissal of feeling is related to a limited ability to feel. It is a mistake. Feeling is a form of knowing. Reason and emotion complement each other. William James, an early pioneer in the field of psychology, went so far as to say, feeling is everything. If doctors would feel what they are doing as well as know what they are doing, they would make better decisions and be less likely to cause unnecessary pain. The medical community has had limitations in other respects. For example, controversies require full and open debate. The misunderstanding of doctors about the foreskin is evidence that full and open debate has not occurred on the circumcision issue. It appears that information and observations that do not fit prevailing ideas are dismissed. A notable example of this occurred in the field of genetics. Decades ago, Barbara McClintock reported that she had observed genes jumping positions within cells. Her work was rejected by colleagues for 30 years because the idea of jumping genes was impossible, according to the prevailing paradigm. Finally, her work was accepted and she was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1984. The lack of feeling and the lack of open discussion among physicians may be connected. Increasing one can facilitate the other. Support for open discussion in the medical community would encourage students and physicians who are inclined to challenge unexamined beliefs, practices, and procedures to speak out. Likewise, consumers need to ask more questions of doctors, and doctors need to respect those questions. Open discussion will benefit everyone and bring us closer to optimum solutions. Even with full debate, the overwhelming pain and harm of circumcision cannot be proven to those who do not or cannot feel. No amount of data or studies will suffice. However, if we could see, hear, and feel what was happening during circumcision, we would not need any studies to tell us what to do. We would know instinctively not to do it. We would know that circumcision is a serious surgical procedure, not the trivial one it is purported to be, because it is unnecessary, because it is a necessary surgery. The burden of proof in the circumcision debate rests with those who advocate it. They must show that it is both safe and effective. Neither has been demonstrated. Ethics and medicine. Like all professions, medicine has its own ethical code and principles of conduct. One rule of conduct is first, do no harm. Removing a normal, healthy body part and causing unnecessary pain is doing harm. Some doctors who circumcise acknowledge the associated pain and then dismiss it by saying it only lasts for a minute, implying that it is acceptable to subject an infant to unnecessary pain as long as it is temporary. In one study, the time required for the procedure ranged from 6 to 40 minutes. However, there is strong evidence that the pain has lasting effects. If it did not, this careless attitude about inflicting pain violates the ethical principles of the medical profession. It also violates general moral principles to subject anyone, particularly a defenseless infant, to any unnecessary pain for any period of time. As recently reported in the New England Journal of Medicine, failure to provide adequate control of pain amounts to substandard and unethical medical practice. Furthermore, circumcision without anesthesia is inconsistent with ethical guidelines that prohibit performing surgical procedures on laboratory animals without anesthesia. Based on these standards, and given that there is no effective and safe anesthetic that will eliminate circumcision pain, all circumcisions would be prohibited. According to the Hippocratic Oath, another important principle of medical practice is that the patient's welfare shall be the doctor's first consideration. In the case of circumcision, doctors generally tend to ignore this rule, while parents falsely believe they are following it. When I visited Dr. Stephen Ringa at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, he defended circumcision by saying that within the community at large, at the present time, there is not a tremendous amount of support for saying to parents, you should not do this. For Dr. Ringer, regarding the issue of circumcision, community attitude seems to supersede the patient's welfare. Isn't it the medical profession's responsibility to lead rather than follow regarding community health care standards? Lawrence Kohlberg's writing on moral development can be applied to thinking about social attitudes surrounding circumcision. According to Kohlberg's stages of moral development, someone who acts based on what is expected by others is exhibiting a conventional level of morality. This is the level of moral reasoning that is most common in our society. A person acting at this level primarily values social approval and adheres to the moral rules and conventions of society. Physicians receive social approval by taking a safe, neutral position on circumcision and doing the surgery if requested. Circumcising an infant is an example of conventional, socially acceptable behavior that is in conflict with universal moral principles. A person who acts according to universal moral principles would exhibit what Kohlberg calls a post conventional morality, the highest level of moral reasoning. Few people choose to follow self chosen universal ethical principles rather than the conventional principles accepted by their society. To do so puts one at risk of being ridiculed, ostracized, or worse. Most people would rather condemn the whistleblower instead of examining their own behavior. Nevertheless, a growing number of doctors and nurses refuse to participate in circumcisions because the procedure conflicts with their ethical principles, and hospitals such as Parkland Hospital in Dallas and Highland Hospital in Oakland no longer do circumcisions. After performing circumcisions for 10 years, one day pediatrician Paul Fleece finally heard the agonizing cry of an infant he was circumcising. He realized what he was doing and stopped performing circumcisions. You just should not be cruel to babies. A physician who agrees to circumcise is complying with a request to inflict pain on another human being. Professor Stanley Milgram conducted a series of experiments at Yale University to find out how far people would go in obeying a command to inflict pain on another person. Most subjects obeyed the command to continue shocking a Confederate who really received no shocks up to the danger level. In a subsequent experiment, Milgram found that a subject could be induced through group pressure to inflict greater harm on an innocent person than the subject did when he or she acted alone. Since physicians recognize that peers generally agree to circumcise, that awareness probably contributes to physicians' willingness to comply with the request. Similar to the arrangement in Milgram's experiments, when physicians perform their first circumcision, they are directed by a superior. Given the past and current cultural and professional environment, only an exceptional doctor would refuse to comply with the senior doctor's instructions. There is no cruel intent, only denial and self deception. Once a physician does a circumcision, he or she has crossed an emotional line from which it is exceedingly difficult to retreat. A range of potential PTSD symptoms may take hold, since such symptoms can be expressed by participants as well as victims of trauma. In a study of Vietnam veterans, all those who participated in atrocities had PTSD symptoms years later. Those who participate in circumcision trauma may deny inflicting harm as a way of protecting themselves against an outbreak of delayed PTSD symptoms. Because the infant's experience of circumcision has been compared to torture in the medical literature, let's consider what the medical profession has to say about physicians' involvement in torture. According to a publication of the British Medical Association, the standard established by the Medical Association, the Declaration of Tokyo, gives little scope for ambiguity on whether or not doctors should become involved in torture of prisoners. It makes clear that the doctor shall not countenance, condone, or participate in the practice of torture or other forms of cruel, inhumane, or degrading procedures. Why do doctors get involved in torture? The reasons include devaluing a victim group, training, fear of the consequences of refusing to cooperate, bureaucratization of the medical role, and an inadequate understanding of medical ethics. All of these reasons apply to circumcision. When a Uruguayan psychiatrist was questioned about his participation in torture, he responded, I was confined to my function. I ignored other aspects, and there were some aspects I did not want to know about. It wasn't my purpose. I am a doctor. As with doctors who circumcise, this doctor's choices were reduced by the fear of knowing. To defend against moral culpability and guilt, physicians have convinced themselves that they are not responsible for circumcision. They claim that they simply defer to parental requests and act as if they have no choice in the matter. George Deniston, a physician specializing in preventative medicine who has served with many medical and professional organizations, asks, since when does a trained surgeon take the advice of uninformed laypeople as to whether or not he should operate? Circumcision is the exception. However, the same doctors would refuse to perform other types of unnecessary surgery on infants. For example, if a parent requested that the infant's toes or ears be cut off for no apparent reason, the physician would decline. An exception to fundamental principles and practice signifies danger. Most physicians do not consider circumcision to be an ethical issue. With enough social support and tacit agreement, people can be incredibly blind to their own ethical violations. Rudolf Hess, a German officer who participated in the mass killing of Jews during the Holocaust, did not think what he did was an ethical issue. At the Nuremberg trials, he said, I really never gave much thought to whether it was wrong. It just seemed a necessity. We just never heard anything else. There is no medical journal article that examines the ethics of male infant circumcision. Earlier citations have been from other sources or articles on pain. However, however, female circumcision is the subject of two such opinion articles. In one article, the writer comments no ethical defense can be made for preserving a cultural practice that damages women's health and interferes with their sexuality. Because of the complication, risks, in addition to potential psychological and sexual impact, a similar statement would apply to male infant circumcision. In the other article, the writer, a female philosophy professor, argues that the physician has a duty only to provide medically appropriate and necessary services, not all possible requested medical services. According to her, the physician is not a moral eunuch and may refuse to provide services for ethical reasons. This would also apply to a woman requesting circumcision for herself. On the matter of a woman requesting circumcision for her daughter, the writer believes that the physician should refuse for ethical reasons, regardless of related cultural values and traditions. The writer concludes by expressing the same views on male circumcision. To argue differently is to be guilty of discrimination on the basis of sex. Both involve what in other contexts would be called non consensual mutilation of a minor or non medical reasons for non medical reasons. Cultural and social perspectives. Why did circumcision gain widest acceptance in the United States? There was a unique combination of social and cultural factors that made people in this country particularly inclined to accept circumcision. Among them were influential writers and medical professionals who promoted it, a health insurance system that continued to pay for it, pervasive sexual anxieties, and the power of conformity. The existence of the practice of circumcision appears to be symptomatic of a deep American insecurity. Our willingness to go to the extreme of participating in cutting off part of our son's genitals may be due in part to alienation that is widespread in our society. Alienation breeds conformity. Researchers have shown that lonely subjects have less confidence in their opinions and are less willing to disclose them. This condition makes them vulnerable to conformity. By reliving the sense of isolation, conformity gives us the illusion of the connectedness we seek. Actually, conformity can displace connectedness. Conformity persists when there is self doubt. With their doubts, conformists view personal responsibility as a burden and gladly trade it for being told what to do. They tend to trust authorities and experts rather than themselves. The problem with experts is not that they can be wrong, but that most people believe they are right. Conformists are subject not only to authoritarian error, but also to authoritarian manipulation. The American conformist's dilemma is that autonomy is also valued, but because they doubt themselves and fear rejection, autonomy is hard to achieve. This fear of disapproval and rejection is the social reason for the enduring tenacity of circumcision. Generally, most of us believe that a person who is natural, genuine, and different will not be accepted. We have forgotten and numbed ourselves to the deep emotional pain that accompanies the choice to hide our true selves. Let's remind ourselves that being true to ourselves is critical to how we feel, and that people who are true to themselves often earn not just acceptance, but the respect and admiration of others. Circumcision exemplifies our tendency to raise our children to be like us, socially acceptable rather than who they really are. It is our society that needs to change, not our children. We can make important contributions to social change when we make important child rearing decisions rather than thoughtlessly imitating the countless decisions of others who did not reflect on their decisions. We can instead give additional consideration to the child's wants and needs and to our own instincts. Recalling the feelings and experiences of our own childhood can also help us to make better decisions for our children. We are social beings. Socialization involves adopting the standards of the group. It matters what others think and do. But doing something only because others do it is not sufficient justification to perform any act, particularly one that involves inflicting pain. Behavior needs to involve self evaluation and awareness of responsibility at some level. If we simply pay attention to ourselves, we will be better able to resist conforming to the practice of circumcision and to other practices that do not meet our needs or improve the quality of our lives. We may discover that the best of what we know has been inside us all along and was not learned from others. Furthermore, becoming more connected to our inner selves will facilitate becoming more connected to others. We are then able to communicate more deeply, for example, which can strengthen our connections with others, increase our confidence, and reduce the appeal of conformity. Cultural arrogance makes it harder to reconsider our actions and admit our mistakes. Americans are raised with the idea that we are the greatest country on earth, the most advanced, and the most compassionate. Compared to other countries, we need to believe we are right and that we know best. Reconsidering circumcision as a tragic mistake conflicts with these easy assumptions. As a result, we honor the suffering and pain we have endured, but deny the suffering and pain we have inflicted. Being honest with ourselves as a culture will relieve us of this pressure to maintain a compensatory, inflated image of ourselves. Our arrogance is apparent in another respect. Circumcision involves altering the human body. Those who would circumcise implicitly suggest that they know better than nature, God, or whatever power created us and our world. Their actions imply that what is natural is either defective and needs correction, or that it can be improved by human intervention. Invariably, this attitude gets us into serious trouble. Our materialistic view of the body gives rise to medical materialism and reflects our cultural materialism. Foreskin, we tell ourselves, is just a little piece of skin, but we are more than our material body. And the impact of circumcision is not just material, it is also psychological and social. When the bond between child and mother is disrupted, the bond between child and humanity is disrupted. Consequently, it is not only the child who is wounded during circumcision, we are all wounded, the parents, the physicians, the community, and the society. Circumcision is an act of diminishing. By removing a normal, useful part, circumcision diminishes the penis. When we diminish the penis of an infant, we diminish ourselves. The associated repression and denial diminish our awareness. The continued denial of feelings and information in any area makes us vulnerable to the same kind of blindness in other areas. Clearly, awareness is crucial for maintaining and improving the quality of life. Our experience with circumcision teaches us that rather than just paying attention to the usual, we would do better to pay more attention to the commonplace. What other beliefs and practices would benefit from close examination? What if the possible social impact of a 25% cesarean rate? Circumcision has a ripple effect that permeates America. It is a source of shame. The way we attempt to alleviate the shame of circumcision is to see to it that others are also circumcised. The way we attempt to alleviate the shame of circumcision is to see to it that others are also circumcised. The denial is contagious. Because our individual and national self esteem are threatened, the silence continues. There are strong indications that we pay a price for this silence in personal and social terms. Inquiry and disclosure are healthy. In the last 20 years, we have learned much about child sexual abuse that was previously hidden. Who would deny that we are better off to know about child sexual abuse than not to know? The increase in media attention to child sexual abuse may be associated with decreased prevalence. By avoiding open acknowledgement of circumcision, we hold on to our pain, guilt, anger, shame, distrust, fear, and isolation. Our internal conflicts are related to our external conflicts. There is a list of societal ills that needs to be scrutinized for potential connections to circumcision. Homicide, rape, and unnecessary surgery, for example. The United States, with its uniquely high rate of circumcision, leads the industrialized world in these categories. Obviously, circumcision is not the sole cause of these problems, but it could be a significant and unrecognized contributing factor. Even if the effects of circumcision were a factor in just a small percentage of these incidents, it would be well worth studying the possibilities. We recognize violence as a social problem, but respond generally with only more security and protection for ourselves and punishment for offenders. If we are going to reduce adult violence, we must reduce violence directed at children. We would do well to direct resources toward prevention, starting with more attention to the perinatal period, simply educating young adults about proper perinatal care and reducing interventions before, during, and after birth could be an effective measure for reducing the incidence of adult violent behavior and a variety of associated problems. Generally, circumcision is a practice that is originated by men, chosen by men, performed by men, and defended by men. Since circumcision is allowed by women, they share in the responsibility for continuing it. Men also control the medical institutions that manage childbirth. Because circumcision occurs shortly after birth, it is also a childbirth issue. The care of a newborn infant and mother requires the most sensitive, empathetic, and responsive human beings. The maternal instincts and experiences of women uniquely qualify them for this important responsibility. For the welfare of newborn infants and society, control of the childbirth experience and its associated concerns needs to be returned to women. Hope for healing. Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Khalil Gibran. Healing the emotional harm of circumcision. Once we have acknowledged the facts about circumcision, strong feelings may start to surface. Some people may choose not to express their feelings about circumcision at all. Others may feel content to talk quietly about them. Still, others may feel as if they could explode. All options should be respected. If one experiences a divorce or the death of a loved one, for example, people generally understand and can respond appropriately. Two factors that make healing from circumcision more difficult than recovering from many other painful experiences in life are that it is both a physical and emotional trauma, and that there is little social acceptance of feelings related to circumcision. For those who choose to explore their feelings, I offer a few general guidelines. Since most feelings connected with circumcision have been kept hidden, social support is necessary to overcome this isolation. Whatever our involvement with circumcision, it can be helpful to share feelings in a safe environment with a trusted partner or with the help of a mental health professional. It will probably be necessary to select potential partners or clinicians carefully to ensure that they are emotionally supportive of feeling connected with circumcision. Because some of the feelings of circumcised men are related to sexuality, support from a sexual partner is especially important. Feelings associated with circumcision can be so strong that they might frighten you with their intensity. However, expressing them will not hurt you. The worst has already happened. Trust your body. It knows how much you can feel and will not let you go any further than that point. For those who tend to rationalize the control of their feelings, trusting the body and not the head is a frightening step. Use your partner's support to confirm that you are safe. Why go through it? The feelings are there, whether we choose to express them or not. If we do not deal with them directly, they will continue to affect us indirectly. As with the expression of more common feelings, there is a sense of release and relief from emotional expression. We discover that it is holding on to the feelings that has hurt us and not their expression. Their expression actually feels good, no matter how bad the feeling is. Releasing them will help us to open blocked energy, increase our ability to trust, enhance intimacy, and regain a sense of personal power. Sharing secrets can be a transformative experience. It is as if the world is lifted off our shoulders. Simply being heard or receiving the feedback of others can dispel years of fearful illusions and create a new bond of trust. Rather than feeling it necessary to prove one's manhood and worth, being heard can facilitate being accepted for who one is. And even more importantly, It can improve self acceptance. Acknowledging and grieving the loss caused by circumcision can help to recover at least some of the emotional part of ourselves that has been cut off. The safe release of feelings can also purge us of emotions that may have driven us to hurt ourselves and others. Recognizing that deep conflicts and anxieties have existed for a reason and are a proper response to the early trauma can also contribute to healing. Surviving early trauma is a triumph for the human spirit. Talking honestly and personally about circumcision has the potential to improve relationships. Whether an exchange about circumcision between sons and parents would be of value depends on the individuals involved. Movement toward resolution requires that each one be open to feelings about circumcision. Sometimes one party is not ready for such sharing. For example, heartfelt apologies by parents may not be appreciated by a son who does not recognize that he has been harmed. A son seeking acknowledgement of his feelings about circumcision from parents who are not ready to hear them presents a more volatile situation. In a few cases, there may be a risk of disrupting the relationship. Sometimes openness can be facilitated by providing literature on circumcision to an uninformed parent before disclosing one's feelings. If openness is there, making healing the goal will increase the chances of a mutually satisfying outcome. While talking about circumcision can be emotionally stressful, expressing these feelings can also result in a breakthrough that renews the relationship. For example, in some cases, witnessing the pain and regret of their parents can help soften the anger and increase the trust of circumcised men at the same time as it relieves parental guilt. With so many men affected, there is much potential for sharing circumcision feelings among men. This can be a significant step toward male bonding and intimacy. Women, too, have an important role to play. Generally, the importance of the support of women cannot be overestimated. Female understanding and compassion are vital to men as they feel increasingly sensitive and vulnerable to feelings about circumcision. The rewards for this support can be considerable for both men and women. Working through our personal pain and connection with circumcision makes it easier to appreciate the larger context of the practice because we were born into a culture that has practiced circumcision routinely. We have been subjected to extremely powerful psychological and social pressures to continue the practice. It is the hurt child in us that wants people to be perfect as parents, doctors, or whatever. When we want others to be perfect, we give them only two options: either pretend to be perfect or risk rejection. Most choose to pretend and hide their weaknesses, their mistakes, and their humanity. Repression and numbing ourselves to our pain are part of the human condition. They are the rule, not the exception. They even serve a vital purpose. They allow us to survive. Yet once we survive the original painful events. These defenses then limit our quality of life and our capacity for growth. When we become parents, they inhibit our ability to meet our children's needs. Eventually, if we are to learn from and move beyond the tragic mistake of circumcision, we will need to have compassion and understanding for ourselves, physicians, parents, and others. This can be a difficult step to even imagine for those whose anger may be just starting to surface. But circumcised men are not the only ones in pain. There is more than enough direct and indirect pain associated with circumcision for all of us. An essential component of healing is forgiveness, both for ourselves and others. Concerning circumcision, we as a society are a long way from that day. Rushing forgiveness is counterproductive as it will deny other feelings their full expression. It will come in due time. Meanwhile, the main point to consider is that our pain can serve to bring us together rather than to keep us apart. Healing involves taking responsibility, whereas physicians and some circumcised men place responsibility for circumcision with parents. Some parents and circumcised men point the finger at physicians. Certainly, medical personnel and institutions have thus far failed to address the problem of circumcision. However, I believe that to hold the medical community or any other group solely responsible for the practice of circumcision would be a serious mistake. A person, group, or institution only has as much power as other people give it. Circumcision is a social problem in which the whole society is complicit. We have more power individually and collectively than we usually are willing to acknowledge. Our reluctance to accept our power is connected to our reluctance to accept responsibility. However, our belief in our powerlessness does not absolve us of our responsibility. Consequently, I believe that all of us as a society share in the responsibility for circumcision rather than just complain that the medical profession does not meet our expectations. We would do better to expand our awareness and then to accept responsibility for what we know and experience. Preventing future harm. Never doubt, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. Circumcision, knowledge, and awareness come with an ethical challenge. When the welfare of a newborn infant is at issue, neutrality is unacceptable. One must take a stand. It is easier to take the side in support of circumcision because nothing is required except silence and passivity. Silence gives implicit permission for more circumcisions. Passivity is complicity. Although circumcisions number in the thousands daily, it is the magnitude of the silence and passivity surrounding the practice that is truly astounding. To be opposed to circumcision requires action. With the acceptance of power and responsibility comes the need for action. It is not just for the infants that we need to act, it is also for ourselves. Circumcised men, in particular, may have a special need to give meaning to their feelings by taking some sort of social action. Taking action to prevent others from being victimized aids recovery. This benefit has already been demonstrated with those who were raped and then worked to prevent others from being raped. In addition, becoming involved in the issue of circumcision offers a person an opportunity for purposeful, creative expression that can open up new levels of experience. Speaking one's truth is a powerful act. There is a sense of freedom in following inner guidance rather than only what is popular. Just as the fear to express oneself spreads to other spreads to others, just as the fear to express oneself spreads to others, the courage to express oneself also spreads to others. That is why expressions critical of circumcision will continue to grow at a surprising rate. The instincts that we have ignored are what have the power to unite us. Acting on one's best instincts with the knowledge that these actions can deeply affect others' lives provides surprising energy and satisfaction. In this way, we become connected to something beyond ourselves. As we change, a part of the culture changes, and there is an effect on the whole. What kind of a society would be without circumcision? I have suggested some possibilities. Let's find out. Circumcision may be the most important, simply preventable American psychological and social problem. It is important because it causes excruciating pain to over a million new people each year. It is simply preventable because all that needs to happen is for parents to keep their newborn sons' healthy bodies intact. It's simple because it's not easy to accomplish. For some, questioning circumcision might disturb their core beliefs and lead to the recognition that they should question everything. As long as they do not trust themselves, that is a step they may not be willing or able to take. Therefore, we must be realistic about the obstacles and know that some people will not listen and many will need time or will need to hear about circumcision repeatedly before the message begins to penetrate their defenses. One man reported after he read an article questioning circumcision, I said to myself, don't think about it. It's easier to laugh it off and push it away. 6 weeks later, he returned to the article and allowed himself to feel more about it. Then he called someone to talk about it and got involved. Psychological research suggests what approaches would work best in attempting to influence people's attitudes. For example, for a maximum change of attitude in others, it is best to have a message that deviates only moderately from the listener's viewpoint. This guideline can be adjusted to suit particular speakers and listeners. Those with higher credibility can make more extreme statements designed to influence attitudes. The more committed a listener is to a position, the smaller the discrepancy must be between that position and the message for maximum change of attitude to be achieved. Consequently, depending on your credibility and your listener, a moderate message will usually have the best chance of affecting another person's attitude. Excuse me. On the other hand, the message about circumcision is so simple and so universally acceptable that many people, including my elderly father, do not need to be persuaded. They get it immediately. Don't hurt babies. The task then is to disclose the simple facts, appeal to their protective instincts, and trust that many people will eventually come to this conclusion themselves. We know that we are in a position of strength. Patience and persistence will be rewarded. How long will it take? That is up to all of us. For those to be circumcised, time is of the essence. Some people may have difficulty being motivated about the circumcision issue. They value only what they perceive affects them personally and directly. If they are circumcised or have circumcised sons, the typical attitude is it's done and there is nothing I can do about it. After learning more about circumcision, one mother told me, "It's too late now, my son is circumcised." By withdrawing, by withdrawing to our own little worlds and leaving the rest of society to take care of itself, we make a costly mistake to think that newborn infants can be subjected to circumcision without its having any impact on others ignores the interconnectedness of all life. When a baby boy's sexuality is not safe, no one's sexuality is safe. If the previous generation had taken action, we would not be a circumcised society today. What we do today for the next generation can help restore our integrity, affirm our connectedness to others, and prevent needless pain. When we are open to our feelings, we are powerful and gain strength as we connect with others. Betty Katz Spurlich was asked where she and her other nurses at her hospital in Santa Fe got their strength to put their jobs at risk, take an ethical stand, and oppose the practice of circumcision by refusing to assist. Spurlich replied without hesitation, we get our strength from the babies. Infants are not as helpless and powerless as some people think. Another who is speaking out is Melissa Morrison, who chose circumcision for her son because it was something that was just done. She watched the procedure and now deeply regrets her decision. People need to know what they are doing to their babies. I didn't know, and ignorance is not an excuse. I'm embarrassed about what I did, but I am not about to hide it. I am talking to my girlfriends. I am talking to mothers. If somebody says to me they are having a little boy, I will beg them not to do it. If it helps just to save one little baby's penis, then it's worth it. Perhaps the biggest lesson from circumcision is that the practice provides shocking evidence that we can cause extreme but unrecognized pain to those we love. It reminds us that we often do not pay attention to the many ways we can hurt not just our children, but also each other. Only when we stop hurting each other will we create the world of love, trust, and peace that we seek. Let us begin with the children.